when I think about the space in general, right, I have like very deep conviction in punks and NFTs, with all the stuff we're doing in Manifold. And I think that value is going to be, come back tenfold, in the future, right? And so, like, for right now, I just don't want to be distracted about, the money part of things. I want to just focus on like building, right? Building myself, building my brand. And so, yeah, and then I tweeted, diamond hands. Want to see what diamond hands looks like? On whole internet look crazy.
This is what diamond hands looks like, ladies and gentlemen.
Matt, happy NFT NYC, man. How you feeling, bro?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling fresh. I can do it a whole nother week.
Yeah, Matt is the human Energizer Bunny. It's iconic. As you can tell, his voice has been talking a lot, running around, DJing a lot, but it's been a fun week, man. Who we got lined up right now?
I'm really excited. We have Richard Chan, the founder of Manifold.xyz, leading studio for creating blockchain products and custom smart contracts for artists. Also made headlines recently when he exhibited his diamond hands in turning down a nearly $10 million offer for his signature CryptoPunk. Really excited to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think really enjoyed hearing Richard talk about the innovation and utility that custom smart contracts can provide, and also even speaking a bit to Manifold Creator, which is a kind of no-code solution just to give more access to this at scale to different creators that want to leverage the power of unique smart contracts. So I think really enjoyed this episode. I think Richard's doing a fantastic job laying a lot of the kind of technological foundations and groundwork and pipes to really push this whole industry forward. So I think really enjoyed this conversation, covered a lot of ground, and I also really love all of you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. So it's been a fun week here at NFT NYC, and excited to dive into this episode with Richard. So without any further ado, Richard.
Richard, so glad to have you on the NFT Now podcast.
Good to be here.
So why don't we start with the basics for our listeners who are maybe new to the space and all that. What exactly is a smart contract?
Yeah, so more generally, a smart contract is a piece of code that's executed, on the Ethereum blockchain, right? And like the big innovation is that you can think of the Ethereum blockchain as this big world supercomputer, right? And why that's important is because it's distributed, right? And because it's distributed, it's verifiable by every single person in the world, right? So why is that critical? Because when something happens on the blockchain, you can be guaranteed that result on the blockchain, the output of that code is the truth, right? You can think of it compared to like a centralized system, whereas in a centralized system there's a server somewhere, right? And somebody could go into the code and like change something without anybody knowing, right? And so that's the big difference between a centralized service and decentralized service, right? And the thing is, nobody owns the Ethereum blockchain, right? And so that means that everybody owns it in that sense, right? And so you can be verified, you can be certain that things that happen on blockchain are permanent and forever.
Yeah, no, love that. So when it comes to the world of NFTs, because obviously smart contracts have tons of different applications, what excites you and why is it so important in the world of NFTs?
Yeah, so I think the big innovation with the the ERC 721, which is the the base technology protocol for NFTs, is that it's the first time we've been able to assign ownership to digital assets, right? Before that, everyone, the whole thing was like, as digital artist, you create your work, put it out online, right? Then everyone would just like, right click save, copy it, right? And there was no way to prove ownership or monetize it properly, right? With NFTs, creators can do that, right? You can say that I am the original creator of this, artwork, and sell it, right, for a monetary value, right? And as a collector, you can say I am the original owner of this, right? And I am the owner, right? Which is a very unique concept for like digital goods.
It's been really cool to see how Manifold.xyz has sort of emerged as the leader in the industry when it comes to custom smart contracts, working on so many innovative projects that are really kind of pushing the tech forward. Tell us a little bit about the origin story of Manifold and what your mission is.
Yeah, so me and my co-founder, we originally came into the space as collectors, right? And so I remember the very first day, my co-founder sent me an NFT, right? And I was just like, what is this, right? He bought a JPEG and it was like, I think like $800. And I was like, you spent $800 on a JPEG, right? It just didn't make any sense to me, right? So then, a week later, he sent me another one, and this was like $1,000. It was a Slime Sunday piece, right? And I was like, okay, the art's cool, right? But I'm like, it still didn't click, right? And then, he was like convinced that this would be my thing. And so a week later, he's like, hey, I need your help to buy one of these things. And so I'm like, okay, sure, right? So he told me the instructions, go into the gateway. He's like, click the button at 4 p.m., right? I'm like, click the button at 4 p.m.? I'm like, what is this? Right? And I was like, how much is it? He's like, $4,000. I'm like, $4,000? Like, what? So anyways, I humored him. I was like, okay, I'll do this because, he's a really smart guy. I trust him. And so, yeah, we go into Nifty Gateway and I'm like looking at this site and then I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And, there were 16 one-on-one Slime Sunday pieces being dropped, right? And so you had to click the button at 4 p.m. for any one of them, right? So I'm like looking at this thing and then, being a programmer, I'm like looking at the page, right? I'm like, oh, you can just like programmatically click the button, right? So I enabled the button, clicked it, and brought me to the next page, right? I did it again, right? And it sent the web request to the server. And I was like, oh, you can just like put this like the call into a loop and just like call it like repeatedly, so you don't have to actually click the button, right? So I did that, and then 4 p.m. comes, and then I'm watching all these like terminal windows on my computer, and they're all like sold out, right? Like instantly, I was like, whoa, what just happened, right? And then after that, I was like, yo, we didn't get one. But then 5 minutes later, I get an email saying, yo, you bought one for $4,000, right? I was like, oh, cool, we got one, right? So then I asked my co-founder, like, well, what do you do with this thing? And he's like, well, you have 3 options. You can sell it, you can hold it, or you can like give it to somebody. And he's like, what do you want to do? And he's like, let's try selling it because that's the most interesting thing, right? And I was like, what do you want to sell it for? He's like, let's put, I think it was like $14,969, right? And I was like, in my head, I was like, who's going to buy it for that? That's like ridiculous, right? Anyways, and he was like, this is it for sale. We caught up because we haven't like talked for like months because of COVID. And then less than 10 minutes after the call ended, I got an email saying it's sold, right? And at that point, I was like, the general reaction is like, you should be happy, right? You just made $11,000 and like for like 20 minutes worth of work, right? But I wasn't happy. I was just like, my first reaction was like, one, sad because, I didn't have that thing anymore. The thing I didn't have an hour ago, right? It was just a piece of artwork, right? And two was that it sold so fast, I felt like I underpriced it, right? So because I had such a very deep emotional reaction to this experience, I was like, there's something crazy here that's going on that I just had to like understand more of, right? So from then, I just started diving into the space. I started building tools for myself as a collector, right? To like analyze the market, figure out more about, how big is the market and so on, right? And it's, just started collecting more and more and more and more things, right? One of the works that we collected was the Mad Dog Jones piece, right? And that led us to being, in contact with Mad Dog. And, one of the first conversations we had, he was very thankful that we were collectors, right? But then we were like, whoa, did you know that, the blockchain is like really cool and you can do all this cool like artwork within it with NFTs, right? And he was just like, what, you can do that? And so he's like, tell me more, right? And so we started collaborating. Right. And so we taught him the concept of a burn mechanic, right? Where you can actually burn an NFT, which is like sending it to the dead address so that no one can access it anymore. So then, we helped him design his crash and burn drop on Nifty Gateway. So I took all the data I had, right, designed an economy. Like everyone thinks it was just like this really simple project, but we actually like looked at every single collector, whether they were a buyer, seller, holder, or flipper, right? And designed it so that we would create maximum price pressure upwards, right, on his existing pieces that he wanted to like burn to redeem for. And yeah, so we did that. The price there was 100 thoughts and ideas of his NFTs from his Genesis drop, and they were $1,000 before the burn mechanic, right? And by the end of it, they went to $150,000, which was like crazy for like being in the course of a week. And from there, right, so this is how we got started Manifold. So after that, we're talking to Mad Dog afterwards, and we're like, let's create the most awesome NFT ever, right? And like just this insane NFT that's like a smart contract and artwork, right? And we collaborated on the replicator, right? And the Mad Dog's replicator, it's a piece of art that is like linked directly to the smart contract, right? So the smart contract kind of runs the artwork itself, and the artwork responds to the smart contract. Right. And it's this innovative piece because, most people were just tokenizing artwork, like taking, images and video and just turning them into NFTs and selling those. But in this case here, the smart contract actually like really, really matters to the art piece itself. Right. And, we sold it. We sold it on Phillips for $4.2 million. And it was at that point we realized that, a lot of artists in the space don't actually understand technology, right? It's almost like you actually need a programmer to actually, develop new innovative, ideas for artwork, right? And to me, NFTs are a new medium, right? And, that combine art and technology. And so we realized that there was a big gap there for, technology, right? And we came up with the idea of, how do we kind of templatize smart contracts and make them extensible so that artists can do way more and be more expressive and actually use the medium of NFTs to the full potential. And yeah, from there we created the Manifold Creator Contract, right, which is kind of our like Genesis product. And yeah, it's just been a wild ride from there. So we have the product, and we also do a bunch of collaborations with other artists, right? And that's to kind of like prove out the technology and show what's actually possible. So that's the Genesis story of Manifold and how I got started in NFTs.
No, that's absolutely amazing and a fun journey, and it's still just getting started. So in that vein too, I mean, kind of why do artists and projects need custom smart contracts? What are some of the innovation and utility that you think custom smart contracts can provide? Because I know obviously there's a lot of ways where you can just easily mint across other platforms, but there's also just a lot of white space opportunity to break trail and do new things with custom smart contracts. So what stands out to you? Yeah,
so if you think about like a standard smart contract, right, it's just really just tokenized, creating a token, right? And you're attaching some sort of media to that token, right? Mm-hmm. That's like the bare minimum smart contract, right? But the thing is, you can actually attach a lot of like data and interaction into the smart contract itself. Like for example, like, if I create an NFT, I could have another NFT in that exact same collection react to that, other NFTs in the system, right? So for example, like, if there's say, 100 people who collect an NFT, it's one version, but let's say, 200 people collected the NFT, right? It could change that. It could actually change the image of the NFT itself, right? So you can create communities around NFT. You can create logic and, interactions and mechanics, right? I think that's a big thing that people always think about too, is like, what is the mechanics of the NFT, which is kind of like utility, right? You can just do a lot of things. At the end of the day, it's just, data written to the blockchain, right? And you're just trying to make the artwork or the tokens like interact with the data, right? And you can't do that this is a very standard minting contract, right? But if you do more custom work and actually do like, advanced, I would say programming of a smart contract, you can do a lot of really cool things, right? I think we're just like starting to explore like, what smart contracts can do, because there's so much more they can do, just beyond NFTs, right? I think of them as like Lego blocks, right? So, if you have, an open smart contract that, has a spec and everything that other smart contracts can interact with those smart contracts and create really, really interesting like mechanics around it too. Like one example is like Fractional just started fractionalizing ERC 721s to 1155s, which is really cool, right? Because what that allows now is that you can create like you kind of Uniswap and market maker mechanics on top of the 1155s, right? And so you can think about the art industry and economies, right? And, Uniswap's a big success. You can now start applying some of those mechanics right directly to NFTs itself, right?
Absolutely. I'm sure that, as you've kind of blazed this trail and established Manifold as a leader in the space, you have, I'm sure, so many projects and artists trying to coming to you all the time. How do you decide which artists to partner with, which projects to partner with? Because I'm sure that demand probably outstrips your bandwidth and supply, Yeah.
So I see it as there's kind of three tiers of artists that we kind of work with, right? So one, you have, the superstars, right? Mm-hmm. We really like working with the superstars because they get it already, right? And for them, right, it's always about how do you push boundaries, right? How do you just like, come up with a new crazy concept and just push it forward, right? And, every artist is just always wanting to do new things and break new ground, right? And so in those cases, it's more about, what is this artist trying to do and how does it kind of move the NFT space forward from, an inspirational point of view or a conceptual point of view, right? And top that too from a technology point of view, right? Because we always use these projects to build back into Manifold for, there are tools and data, right? So that we can offer more products to like, other creators, right? So that's one tier. The second tier are kind of like the middle tier artists who are just, they have a bit of a name themselves, right? And they're trying to like, just mint stuff, right? And so we like working with those artists because that represents kind of like the general use case for like NFTs right now, right? And for those artists, we work directly with them, like getting onto our contracts and just kind of like create like scalable mechanics, right? So that they can like drop a collection and reuse that, right? And that's part of the vision for Manifold Creator, right? It's a no code solution where you can come in there, go and accomplish what you want to do, and then get it out there for distribution, right? And then I guess on the other side, we do work with a few smaller artists, right? And just helping them to like understand the space, because from my point of view, you have to help everyone, right? Because the top artists right now, they were once small artists too, right? And we're trying to understand what all the problems of the space are, so we can come up with like solutions for that, right? And so I've talked to a few artists that have never minted before, and I help them like mint, set up a smart contract, mint, and educate them, just so I understand what are their pain points, right? And how we as an ecosystem can create better tooling and education to like move them up the ladder, right? I think that's a really important thing, because at the end of the day, our goal is that every single person, every single creator should be able to have their own smart contract if they choose to, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing, and very excited to see how Manifold Creator rolls out and empowers all these artists in new ways. In that vein, too, I know you've referenced a handful of projects, Mad Dog Jones, a little bit of the origin story. What are some of the other favorite projects that you've worked on to date, or even some stuff that you're excited about that's in the works?
Yeah. So Mad Dog was Mad Dog's like, will always be my first love, because it was like our first major project, right? It's funny because like nobody knew me before that, and all of a sudden Mad Dog came out with the thing, and it was a big thing. So that was really cool. And then, so we got Mad Dog. I really like collaborating with Fuckrender Fred. He's just fun, right? For him, it's always just like, how do we just do something ridiculous, right? Which is always fun, right? He's just willing to try stuff that's like really cool, right? And I guess like Pack, right? So Pack is one of our other big collaborators.
And if you could dive a little deeper too, and kind of like with Fuckrender or with Pack, like what are some of the things that you did specifically with their smart contract?
Yeah, well, okay. So with Fuckrender, we did his Fuck crystals, right? And so the big thing with that is you could take some of your Nifty Gateway NFTs, right? And you could like burn them to get Fuck crystals, right? And so it's kind of, we combined two kind of mechanics here, right? One of them was taking existing NFTs and burning them, right, to get new NFTs, right? And we also did a collection drop, right? And the cool thing is that for that, he was trying to reward holders, right, while reducing supply to increase increase the value of his older works, right? And so it was just really fun to be able to like experiment those sort of mechanics, right, and actually like have it go like live, right? And that was really cool because it sold that there was like a pre-sale, or, a whitelist pre-sale. It wasn't really a whitelist; it was like a burn pre-sale, right? And that lasted for like I think an hour, right? Then after that, the actual like public sale, and the public sale sold out in like 2 blocks or something like that. So it was really cool to watch all that and like how everything came together for that. And then with Pack, it's just like, he just has all these crazy ideas, and we just like listen to him and we're like, whoa. And it's always a collaboration, right? So it's really cool to just like talk and actually see what they're doing, and when we work on these kind of like more high profile projects, it's not like, the artists telling us what they want. It's us actually putting like contributing to the ideas from a technology point of view of like what's possible from a design point of view, right? Because I can tell you every single idea that comes to us is just not, when it first comes to us, it's just an idea, right? It's hard to actually like create something that actually like makes sense from the long run. And then another artist I really like working with is Alpha Centauri Kid. Yeah, so it's actually funny because we bought one of his pieces, just because he featured my punk on it, and then all of a sudden he started like blowing up, right? And then for him, it's really funny because he's crazy, right? He just like, I'm gonna do this, right? And then like a day later, he'd be like, it's done, right? I'm like, and they're like, what do you want to do with the art, right? And he's like, I wanted to go do these crazy things with it, right? And just fun. It's just fun collaborating with these people.
I love that. One of the most, kind of notable recent releases for you has been the open source royalty registry. And I know, it has a number of different facets to it. Kind of creating, like helping sort of like the appropriate on-chain royalty configuration work with smart contracts across different platforms. And then also enabling users to potentially add smart contract functionality where there wasn't before. I'd love if you could take us through that project and how you feel it could help solve the issue of cross-platform secondary sales royalties.
Yeah. So, like working with all these artists, right? And royalties is like a huge deal for the NFT space, right? Because it's the first time that you can actually verify that when something gets sold, that you can get royalties paid back to the original creators, right? And that kind of sustains their career, right? And so when you think about royalties, I think a lot of people don't really understand what royalties are, because the misconception is that you can just like force people to pay royalties in the smart contract, right? Which you can't do, right? You can put information into the smart contract, right? That says here's my desires. But at the end of the day, it's up to the selling marketplace to respect those desires, right? And so, the big player was OpenSea, right? So OpenSea is kind of like the de facto secondary market, the largest secondary market in the place, right? And their royalty system was, just didn't work for how creators wanted the royalties to be paid out, right? So the way it works is that you can have a collection, but you can only have one payout address, right? And that applies to the entire collection itself, right? And so if you think about royalties from a point of view, if you have a collaboration, right? What artists were doing at the time were they would set an address, right? And then royalties would accrue to that address. And some later date, they would take the address and be like, okay, there's this amount of money in here. I got to split it between, different parties that are entitled to royalties. And so we've been working with, we work very closely with all the marketplaces because, we help artists mint, right? But royalties were always like a big pain point for pretty much everyone in the ecosystem, right? Even OpenSea, right? And so, and on top of that too, is that there's a whole bunch of different specs out there right now. So you have the Rarible spec, you have like AIP, I think 2981. You have the custom implementations like OpenSea, right? So OpenSea's royalties are just completely off-chain. It's on their own system, right? And one of the big problems is that as a programmer, right, it's really hard to figure out what royalties are because you have to go through and be like, okay, what spec is this one using? Is it compliant? Does it have the right information, right? And so to me, the royalty registry was just a necessary infrastructure component, right? That was necessary, right? So what you can do is, what it does is that it reads every single smart contract, or if you could put an address in there, it will read the smart contract and check if it does follow one of those royalty specs, and if so, it creates a standard interface for anyone to read it. Whereas before, all the interfaces were different, right? So as a programmer, you had to be like, okay, you have to check which one it was, right? And on top of that too, there's a lot of smart contracts out there that existed that previously didn't have any royalty information associated with it, right? And so by having kind of a centralized smart contract registry protocol, right, you can go in there and be like, here's my NFT, and tell me what the royalties are, right? And it's just one common interface, right? It's really simple to use, and so we started talking to all the marketplaces about it, right? And we're not the only ones who have this problem. They all have this problem, right? And it's a big decision, right? When you talk to different, even Nifty, they're like, we chose this spec, right? When you talk to Rarible has their own spec, right? And they're all trying to be compliant, right? They're all trying to move really, really fast, right? And so you just have to choose one, right? But choosing one has big implications, right? So what we're saying with the royalty spec is that we don't care which one you choose. If you implement one, you'll be compliant with this one common interface that just kind of multiplexes all the information and gives you a standard way to read it. So as a programmer now, you just don't have to care about which implementation. You just have to read the royalty registry contract to figure out what the information you need, which is a huge step forward for just NFTs in general. And I think the biggest achievement of this is that we actually got every one of the marketplaces to hop on board and be like, yeah, this is this is good for the industry. This is good for the good for the space. And going forward, they've all committed to supporting this.
That's huge, man. And I'm super excited because I know there's, just generally speaking, there's so much utility and innovation to be had by NFTs. And I think a lot of us that spend a lot of time thinking about it see the implications it will have. But a lot of the technology itself is still so nascent that a lot of the actual utility is yet to truly be unlocked at scale. So in that vein, too, I'm curious from your perspective, what are other areas of opportunity to streamline kind of onboarding and make this easier? You even mentioned kind of Manifold Creator and how you want to have a no-code solution for different creators to release their stuff. I know there's a lot of friction right now, both for artists, for collectors, that unless they really have a somewhat kind of deep mid-tier understanding of how to buy and sell and collect NFTs, it can be a little bit intimidating. So I'm curious from your perspective, where are there other opportunities to kind of streamline, remove friction to help onboard the mainstream market into NFTs?
Yeah, so I think when you think about NFTs are kind of a higher level concept, right? Mm-hmm. The more fundamental concepts are more like crypto. How do you interact with crypto? How do you use a wallet? Security is a big one, right? I think that a lot of people come into the space and they're like, oh, I'm just going to use MetaMask and on board with that. But we all know that MetaMask isn't the most secure hardware or secure wallet solution, right? And so, it's actually really hard to onboard into crypto in general, right? Most people are looking for like a centralized service such as like Coinbase or Coinbase Wallet. But if you actually want to do it right, you have to be self-sovereign in that case, right? And so I think a lot of education and tooling just has to be done at the lower levels of, how do I even get started with crypto? How do I get my first crypto? How do I interact with the blockchain, right? And I think that the tooling right now is very, very like in the early days, right? Like I think everyone uses MetaMask, right? And it's kind of crazy that MetaMask is like the de facto for everything, right? Whenever MetaMask has an issue, right, with some of the hardware wallets or just like in general, right, the whole entire crypto space is like, hey, what happened, right? And so, I think there's opportunities there around education, tooling, wallet solutions, even identity. Like, what does it mean to have your identity as a wallet, right? I think that going forward, we're just going to see more and more innovation around that, right? Like, for example, I think all identities should actually be contracts, right? Mm-hmm. Because, if I think about my wallet, my key, right, where you sign, my address is my identity. But, I've worked with a whole bunch of like people and individuals and corporations before. And, if I lose my privacy, if I lose my key phrase, right, then there is no like recovery for that, right? But if you think about the ideal kind of identity solution going forward, it's every single person will have their own contract that represents their identity, and you can have multiple people access that contract or have multiple keys for that. That way, if you're in a situation where you need to like either transition the identity in the case of a corporation, or personally to just transition your identity and assets to a loved one, right? There is that mechanism there.
I love that. One thing I often say is decentralization is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? It's like there's no customer support hotline for the Ethereum blockchain, but there's MetaMask. There you go. But on the topic of digital identity, you made headlines in the past month or in recent weeks after I remember you had tweeted that you wouldn't sell your CryptoPunk, your main CryptoPunk, for even $1 billion, and then I think POAP called your bluff by making an offer on that punk for, I believe it was nearly $10 million. Yep. And you still said no. And it caused a lot of conversation in the space. Some people thought you were crazy for turning it down. Other people really understood it. I'd love to hear, just in your words, take us through that experience and your thought process there.
Yeah, so I think I was on a conversation, or I was on Twitter. I tweeted something like, what happens if all 10K owners of a 10K project never sell, right? And then there was a reply that said, everyone has a price, right? Someone's going to sell, right? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to sell my punk, right? And he's like, yeah, if someone offered you $1 billion, of course you would, right? I'm like, no, I'm not going to sell, right? It's my punk, it's my identity, right? I associate it with it, right? So anyways, next morning, I'm interviewing somebody for a job in Manifold. And all of a sudden, I get all these messages. So my DMs are blowing up, my messages are blowing up, and everyone's like, "Go, Richard, go check Twitter, right?" And I have no idea. I'm like, I'm trying to do this interview right here. So I go off the side, open this thing, right, and I'm like looking at Twitter, right, and there's like everyone's messaging me, and they're showing the CryptoPunk bot offer, right, and I was looking at it. I'm like, hey, that punk looks really familiar. I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, is this my punk? I'm like, yeah, this is my punk, right? Then I looked at the offer. I'm like, 2,500 ETH. I'm like, my first reaction was like why, right? But I was also in an interview at the time, right? So I'm like, I'm trying to not be distracted, right? Because it's like,
wow.
Yeah. So I'm like talking to the guy. I'm like, okay, I just can't like deal with that right now. Like,
I'd be like, I gotta go, bro.
Right. So, anyways, I finished my interview, right? And I go back and I look at this thing. I'm like, okay, there's a 2,500 ETH on my punk, right? And then I'm like, who offered this, right? So I go actually look at it. Like my first reaction was like, no, this can't be real, right? And I go look and it's like, oh, POAP, right? And I'm like, I know who POAP is, right? And I didn't know like who was behind this thing, right? I thought it was like a marketing stunt originally, right? And so then I'm like, I know it's real, right? Because it's an offer on the Larva Labs site, which means that the money's actually custodied on the Larva Labs contract, and and I could just accept it and it would just transfer over to my account, right? And so I really just sat there and thought about it for a second. I'm like, well, like I was just trying to understand what was going on, right? Because there's a lot of stuff going on, right? And so I messaged my co-founders and I'm like, hey, I got this thing, right? And they're like, that real? And like, everyone's reaction is like, is this real, right? And I went through the messages and so on, and I started looking at. I'm like, yeah, it was real. I got a message, I got a DM from POAP, and it was like, let's make history today, right? And from there, I just started reading all the comments, right? And it's kind of interesting because like, a lot of people were like, Richard, accept, right? But then a lot of people were like, oh no, Richard's not going to sell. Like, he's not going to sell.
Diamond hands.
Yeah, right. So actually, my very first reaction, right, was like, no. Like my default was like, no, I can't sell. Right. It's actually funny. I posted my tweet. I put a draft of my tweet and let's like, screenshotted it and sent it to a bunch of people. And they're like, yeah, that's like the right move. Right. But then, but I actually just like sat down and actually thought, what does this actually mean? Right. Because, it was a large offer. Right. And, and that to me, that takes, consideration and deserves respect. Right. So I sat down and I thought, what does it mean to actually sell it? And what does it mean to, accept it? Right. And where I came out to was that, so in my head, I was actually trying to convince myself of why I should accept. It wasn't like why I should reject. It was like, my default was to reject. And I was going through the scenarios like, what cases would this be good to accept, right? And, I thought about, well, it's a lot of money, right? But, it's also this brand and identity that I've been building over time, right? I associate very deeply with my punk, right? And, on top of that too, I think of it as, my personal integrity too, right? The day before I said, I'm not going to sell, right? And that, when I say something, it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me, right? And everyone was like, no, we're not, I think a lot of people were like, no one's going to worry about that. It's just a big amount of money. It's going to be like good for the space. It's going to make the punks go through the roof, right? But then I thought about it too. I was like, well, would I be happy if I accepted it? And, the answer was like, no, I wouldn't be happy, right? I would have been kind of sad, because one, I didn't have my punk anymore, right? The only reason why I got the offer was because I said I wasn't going to sell. And so, I thought about it for a few minutes and was like, no, the right answer for me was not to sell. When I think about the space in general, right, I have like very deep conviction in punks, in NFTs, with all the stuff we're doing in Manifold. And I think that value is going to be, come back tenfold, in the future, right? And so, like, for right now, I just don't want to be distracted about, the money part of things. I want to just focus on, like, building, right? Building myself, building my brand. And so, yeah, and then I tweeted, diamond hands. I see what diamond hands looks like. On whole internet look crazy.
This is what diamond hands
looks like, ladies and gentlemen. Right, And then, after that, it was just like, I didn't think about it after that because, that was the right decision, right? I still have no regrets about it. That was it. I think the funny part was more about the reactions afterwards, right? Because, within, my circle of, NFT Twitter, everyone's like, everyone's like celebrating. But as soon as it got more mainstream, everyone was like, what an idiot. This is like, right? What an idiot. This is money laundering. Like this guy just fumbled the ball, right? Right. But the thing is, like, all those people, they still don't have any context of, like who I am, what I'm building, all those sort of things, right? I think one of the biggest things is that people thought it was like a fake offer. Right. But, it wasn't a fake offer. I've had one conversation in an email exchange with Patricio, who is the founder of POAP, right? But nothing to ever do about like, hey, I want to buy your punk or anything like that. He's trying to give me an introduction to another investor, right? So it's actually interesting because I actually had lunch with Patricio yesterday, right? And so we started talking about it, right? And, I asked him like why, right? Mm-hmm. And, I asked him if he had a punk. He's like, no, I don't have a punk, right? But he said that, part of the reason why was that if he wants something, he wanted to have a really good story behind it, right? Because obviously he could have bought any other punk out there. There was like 3D glasses punks, right? But he's like, to me, he wanted the punk, right? It was just strictly, he just wanted the punk, which is like really interesting, right? And, he wanted the story of, I got Richard to, sell me his punk, right? Even though he said he wouldn't, right? And so that's what he was going for. He was going for like the story behind the punk, right? Because he wants meaning behind the things that he collects.
That's interesting. It's like part of the provenance.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yes, he did offer me a lot of money, but if I did sell, it would have that punk itself would have had a certain history.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me too because we're in a business where your credibility is king, and to you, having just put your as you said, they called your bluff immediately.
Yeah.
Your credibility was on the line. I understand why, in a business like this, some things can't be bought, Yeah.
Well, I guess as we come to close, I'm just curious, man. I mean, obviously, you're really kind of laying a lot of the pipes and infrastructure to help drive the space forward overall. I mean, what kind of excites you most about the future of the space and how it can impact creators, collectors, just general market in general?
Yeah, I know. I think we're still really, really early for like NFTs itself, right? So, if you think about the kind of NFTs that are out there now, it's mainly just like art and collectibles, right? I think that we found these kind of like really interesting communities and like use cases for NFTs, but we've just kind of barely scratched the surface, right? You could think of like any sort of ownership can be attached to NFT, can be turned to an NFT, can be tokenized and turned to an NFT for itself, right? And if you think about it, like there's only, I want to say like 500,000 to 1 million people who are actually like messing around with NFTs right now, right? And, in the future, I think NFTs will be the backbone of our digital economy, right? Just like, you got gaming, you got movies, you have like, just like anything that is digital or needs representation can be turned into an NFT, right? It's kind of like right now, secretly behind the scenes, a lot of these financial institutions are using crypto to like, move money back and forth, right? And we don't even know that's happening, right, behind the scenes, right? But, crypto has become this big infrastructural piece for a lot of like financial institutions to, run their businesses, right? And I think the same thing's going to happen with NFTs is that, NFTs will kind of be secretly behind the scenes for a lot of things going forward, right? And especially when you can like think about how communities get involved with it too, right? Because it's such a close-knit community between like creators and participants, right? I think that once everyone gets on the NFTs, it's going to be a wild ride, right? To me, it's like being back in the early days of the internet, right? I've been through, I'm too old for the first like web boom, right? But I was there for the mobile boom and like the first crypto boom, right? And it feels just like that same amount of energy is in the space right now, right? And we all know how, the Web 2 era and the mobile and the crypto space, turned out 10 years later, right? So I think we're just like, we're just at the very cusp right now of, realizing what's possible.
It's fun time, very fun time.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for all the work you're doing, how you're giving back and contributing and empowering the community at large, and really grateful to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Richard. Great to have you.
Man, well, that was a fun conversation. He's really, really doing a fantastic job at laying a lot of the infrastructure for this community and for this industry to push the space forward. What stood out to you, Matt?
I loved hearing his thought process behind Manifold Creator and also the royalty registry, which I think is a huge development, in terms of empowering artists and ensuring that those on-chain royalties are able to be respected cross-platform. Loved also hearing his rationale about the CryptoPunk. Some things are not for sale.
That's right. Well, Richard, really enjoyed having him on. Appreciate you all for always supporting. If you haven't already, definitely be sure to check out our newsletter. Every single week, we're distilling the market down to actionable insights, so you can really tap in, unleash the power of NFTs. Just sign up for that at nftnow.com, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so much.